Hi, welcome to the virtual tour for Drawn Home, the latest exhibition at the Art Gallery of St. Albert. My name is Emily Baker, and I'm the curator here at the Art Gallery of St. Albert, which is part of the Arts and Heritage Foundation. So without further ado, let's get started and take a dive into this beautiful group exhibition, which features 32 artists and over 57 pieces, all of which are looking at the ways that artists see their ideas of home, how they see their own communities, and what makes them feel that they are most at home. And so the Drawn Home exhibition features artists from the Big Lake Artist Studios, the St. Albert Photography Club, and the Visual Arts Studio Association, all of which are active and vibrant elements of the arts community here in St. Albert. While not all of the artists may live in St. Albert, they're dedicated to working, capturing, and sharing their artistic visions of the community around us. And what better way to bring them together than to share their ideas of home? And so to get started, we'll first be showing a video sort of simulating your first entry into the Art Gallery of St. Albert for those of you who've never been here. And so on our main floor, we have mostly a retail space, as well as our rental and sales gallery. And then the main exhibition space is up our lovely staircase here, which our video will now take you up. And so for the Drawn Home exhibition, bringing together these three arts organizations was not just a way of showcasing the exceptional talent that lives in this community, but also introducing people who might not know these organizations to the fabulous work that they do and to sort of their missions and mandates in the world. And so I'm going to give you a really brief history of each of the organizations, starting in chronological order with the St. Albert Photography Club. Established in 1992, the club was initially about 5 members who met to start a club that would not only sort of foster critique and creative exploration, but be a place where people could explore new techniques, meet like-minded people, people who love and adore photography, as well as be exposed to the huge range of work that is captured under the label of photography. And so the club encourages everything from traditional analog photographers who work in dark rooms to fully digital photographers who do a lot of manipulation of their images and post-production to create exactly the image and compositions that they're looking for. The club members generally meet 3 Wednesdays per month. It's been happening virtually for the last little while, but not only do they sort of share techniques and tricks, they have monthly competitions in a wide range of subjects to sort of spur creativity and prompt some new ideas and some new interpretations for their work, as well as they host seminars and lectures from photographers outside of the club, as well as other experts in their field, whether that be from scientists, naturalists, other kinds of artists, to broaden the horizons and the interest in people in the club. Members in the photography club range from 12 and upwards, and everyone shares a deep passion for the club and for their medium. And that is one of the wonderful things that ties the organization together, regardless of the participants' background, their own preferences, their artistic expression. All of them share a deep passion for photography, and that's what binds them. The second organization we'll talk about is the Big Lake Artist Studios. No one can quite remember exactly when the studios got started. Estimate is in the early 2000s. And the Big Lake Artist Studios is a working studio space set in Riel Business Park. And so what I mean by working studio space is that these are places, this is a space where the artists go to create their work. It's not an exhibiting space. There's about 12 artists who are working at the Big Lake Artist Studios at the moment. And they work in a wide range of mediums, from mosaics to watercolor painting to drawing to bookmaking and printmaking, as well as painting and mixed media. And the thing that the artists mention that they enjoy the most with the Big Lake Artist Studios is a strong sense of community. And so there's always someone there to bounce ideas off of, to help problem solve or troubleshoot a work of art that might be not turning out quite as you expected, or to just simply have conversations and sort of broaden one's own horizons and perspectives. It helps to give a strong sense of reflection on the work that you're creating, sparking new ideas and creating this really tight-knit community of people who share such a deep passion and love for creation. One of the other things that the artists really enjoy about having a dedicated studio space outside of their homes is this ability to go to a place where the sole job at hand is a creative task. There's no other distractions, and so even if they maintain a studio space at home as well, they find their time at the Big Lake Artist Studios to be much more productive and much more focused, because that is the only job that they are required to do at the time. The last organization that we'll talk about is the Visual Arts Studio Association, VASA. which is based out of the Hemingway Building on Sir Winston Churchill Drive. And so VASA also, like these other organizations, has a long history and has not always been known as the Visual Art Studio Association. Initially starting as the Studio Gallery, founded by Pat Wagensfeld, they were based out of Grandin Mall, as well as maintaining other satellite locations at one point in 19 Peron Street, which is now the home of the Art Gallery of St. Albert. And so VASA Pat Wagensfeld wanted to bring all of the VASA artists together under one roof. That was one of her goals for the organization. And so when a lease became available at the Hemingway Building, she lobbied with the city in order to create a space for VASA where they could start to maintain studio spaces for artists. Similarly to Big Lake Artist Studios, these are working spaces, but VASA also has exhibition space as well. And they're open to the public for visitorship. And so you're welcome to visit VASA Tuesdays to Saturdays from 1:30 till 5 p.m. And the artists there have a regular regular volunteer shift. So there's always somebody on hand to chat about the work, introduce you to the different studios, the other artists who maintain space there, as well as to show you around their exhibition space, which is kind of in the center. So the studios are all around the sides, and you have this wonderful display space in the center. And so they showcase a lot of local artists, a lot of VASA members, as well as bringing in shows from the outside. And so some of the artists work in their studios in VASA. Some of them use their studio spaces as exhibition spaces, so you can see final finished artworks. And it gives you a really wonderful sense for the entire creative process for a lot of different kinds of people. So for every artist, their creative process will look a little bit different. And so one of the glorious things about VASA is being able to experience these different variations, these different skills, these different techniques and medias that artists are exploring and working with all in the same place. So if you do have the chance, I do encourage you to visit. And so now that you know a little bit more about the organizations that are taking part in Drawn Home, I'd like to give you a bit of a background on how this exhibition came together in the first place. And so the Art Gallery of St. Albert wanted to create a show that would bring together the skill and talent and dedication of artists who work and live in this community all together under one roof. We thought that the theme of Drawn Home, which was intentionally set to be quite broad, would be a wonderful grounding point for the artists, providing enough flexibility and freedom that they can interpret the theme in any way that they choose. And so the artists worked closely with each of these organizations to put out a call for submission, requesting that artists who are interested in taking part in the show send us up to 3 images of their work. And then a jury of gallery staff, as well as representatives from each of the organizations, selected the works that would be chosen for the exhibition. This was based not only on artistic skill and merit, as well as taking into consideration the other works that were being selected for the exhibition, and what work sort of harnessed this idea of Drawn Home in really unique and diverse ways, wanting to sort of provide a plethora of experiences and impressions and interpretations of the theme for the viewers. In the end, we ended up selecting 32 artists and over 57 pieces to show in the exhibition, everything from mosaics to photography to drawings to paintings to mixed media work. So there's a lot of pieces to go through. And one of the interesting things that came out after all the works were selected was how many artists were thinking about home in various ways. And so for this first section of the exhibition, which is on the south wall of the gallery, the focus that the pieces I selected for this space are very much focused on the house is an internal place. And so that's the indoor structures of the house, of things that you would find inside homes before we venture outwards. But also things that are captured within homes are sort of those emotional attachments, those memories that we form with the people and places that we love that are near and dear to us. And so without further ado, we'll go through this wall kind of one at a time to take in some of the pieces and to get to know the artists who are taking part in the show. So the piece that launches the exhibition is called Solitude, Coming Home to Myself by Katherine Mcmillan. And this work is very much about thinking about how a house can still be a home when the people who made it home are no longer there. And so what this means is that Katherine lost both of her parents very quickly from one another relatively recently, and they were still living in the home that she grew up in. And so her relationship with this building that has so many memories and so many emotional attachments changed quite dramatically, quite quickly. And so with her work, which includes this piece, as well as 2 others that we'll see later on in the exhibit, it's about coming to a new relationship and a new term of acceptance with this place that has always been home to her that has shifted. And so you can see the figure in the piece that's sitting on top of the house feels quite isolated. She's surrounded by these dark skies, but it's not a hopeless piece. There's a lot of color and joy and sort of whimsy put into the trees or floral elements that kind of wreathe around the figure. And so while this piece seems a little bit lonely, it's not sort of it's not kind of unending, it's not isolated. And so what you can get a sense for is someone whose relationship with the place that they are is shifting and changing. And while it might be a sad experience, it's not going to be sad forever. And so as we're kind of thinking about our relationships to home, I wanted to bring attention to Jill Latamniak's photographs. And so Jill Latamniak is the only photographer in the exhibition who isn't part of the St. Albert Photography Club. She's actually a member with VASA. And the interesting thing that I want to point out before we talk about the themes of this work is how the images are actually created. And so you might assume that these are several layers of digital images that have been stitched together, but they're actually, in fact, physical vignettes that the artist has sort of assembled using everyday materials and then photographs through them with no digital editing afterwards. And so in the bottom image, you get this beautiful photograph, this antique photograph of what looks like a woman, possibly from the 30s, based on her hairstyle and her makeup, maybe a little bit earlier than that. But she seems very distant from the viewer, sort of fractured and isolated, boxed in by whatever this form is on top. My best guess for what that form is possibly a vintage glass, or some sort of square glass that might be green. And then Jill's setting up lights along the outside to create these luminous effects, and then shooting her camera down through the glass to the photograph underneath. Likewise with the photograph on top, possibly that's a bit of distorted glass or broken glass that's been layered over top of the same image of that woman. One of the things Jill wanted to explore with these pieces is this idea of emotional separation or distress. How can one still feel at home when one is experiencing mental health crisis, or how can a house still feel like home when someone in the home is suffering? And so she's wanting to create these images that really give you that sense of displacement and sort of isolation for the figure, and kind of give that bit of an uneasy self, because as we all know, homes are not always happy places. Our relationships and our lives go through cycles of happiness or struggle or change, and those elements are all part of our own experiences of home. And so I thought it was an important message to bring into the exhibition. As we kind of move along this sense, we get a sense for, move along the section of the wall, we get a sense for things that might be found in the interiors of homes, whether that's writings or flowers, sort of elements that would be familiar to us as in the immediate environment of our physical houses. This brings us to these wonderful ink and watercolor drawings by Louise Medler Johnson. These pieces are really, really entrancing as the viewer, not only because the line work is so delicate, but the details are all incredibly intimate. You get a sense that Louise is drawing a place that she knows very, very well, from sort of the clutter on the stove top to the little details on the table leg on that piece on the bottom left. And you get a sense that these are warm, comforting spaces as well, almost as if you're familiar and you're welcome here. Again, in that bottom left piece, I get the sense that someone has just gotten up and off of that couch, and the seat might just be warm. They might have gone out to get a cup of tea or left the room briefly for a moment, but it feels like that comforting presence is still there. I feel like that's quite a feat for something that seems like quite a simple drawing from the outset, using line and washes of color, but she's managed to capture this really tender emotional connection to these spaces. The trio that follows pairs two pieces by Peg Mcpherson with a mixed media piece in the center by Bet Lizutza. And what I wanted to draw your attention to with these pieces are things that are, again, in that immediate environment of the home, a flower vase and possibly a centerpiece, or on sort of a tabletop that might be inside the home, as well as pieces that were created inspired by somewhere directly outside of the home. So Peg Mcpherson's pieces to start are inspired by her spending a lot of time in the immediate outdoors in her at her house. So watching the nature in her backyard or out of her front step. And so she wants to create these pieces that are based on close, careful looking. So the interactions of the birds throughout the year. And so this observing that Peg does is something she does every day. And it's a practice she's maintained for a long time. And those small details and those small observations play back into her work. But Lizitz's work, on the other hand, I wanted to draw your attention to how it was created, the materials that she's using to make this piece. And so you can see on some of these floral elements, it looks like sort of line drawing layered with painting and stamps. But in fact, it's stitching that Bet has done to create these drawings onto fabric. And so what Bet does is that she'll stitch these patterns and designs onto pieces of fabric using her sewing machine as her drawing tool, and then scan these images and print them onto tissue paper to then include into her work. And so all of the elements in Bet's work are sourced by the artist and created by the artist, including whether that's the photographs of the flowers that are printed in exactly the same way, or the drawing elements that she's included in. And so it's this really labor-intensive process that she does to create these works. And I think it was a really strong compositional choice for her to paint the background into the soft gray blue. It gives your eye a place to rest and sort of refresh itself as you go back and take in the numerous details that are in this piece. And so when you're looking at each one of these layers, say this drawn element with the flower, and behind it, there's layers of stamps and patterns and washes of color. So the more you look at this work, the more that you're going to end up seeing. And so having a spot for the eye to kind of rotate through and rest is a strong compositional choice because it allows you more time as the viewer to take in the rest of the piece. As I mentioned earlier, part of what makes the inside of a house a home is the memories that go with it. And that's exactly what these lino cuts by Janice Peters are about. And so for these works, Janice is looking to her memories of growing up in the United Kingdom as being very formative for what makes a house a home for her. And so you have memories of sights and sounds that were familiar during her childhood and early adult years, whether they be from familiar animals such as the blackbird, which would be singing daily out in the garden, or things that you would see while walking down by the shore, which would include these little fishing boats. Something that also plays into our identity and our sense of place is the history of that place where we grow up. And that includes monuments like the White Horse chalk drawing on the hillside in the United Kingdom that is centuries old. And so all of these ideas and memories play into what creates us as people and kind of creates and fosters our identity and are equally as important to the physical things around us and the places around us. One thing I would like to note is that in the exhibition space, these three pieces are actually hung one on top of the other with the blackbirds on top, the boats in the center, and the white horse underneath. Putting that together on a slide for you today would make it a lot harder to see those images. They would have been much smaller. So I just wanted to note that this isn't exactly how they're displayed in the gallery space. As we kind of come to the end of this wall, we start to look outwards as viewers. And so we come to this farm window that was created by Carol Donald, which uses an actual window frame that she found. And Carol's practice as a mosaic artist is incredibly inspired by the materials she's working with. She looks to the materials to very much inform what she wants to create. And when she found this window frame, she thought it would be exactly the perfect addition for her to create a mosaic within the frame as part of this exhibition. And so what we get with this piece is sort of the sense of looking outwards, being inside a home, but looking to the landscape beyond, which is an important stepping stone to the rest of the exhibition. She's also playing with forms that as Canadians we're very familiar with. If we think about the paintings and the artists that help define our identity as Canadians, we think of the Group of Seven, we think of the rustic mountainous landscape or the Canadian Shield and sort of these weather-beaten trees and these wild spaces. And so I really enjoy that Carol has captured this sense of the wilderness of the vast Canadian landscape outside of the window, sort of inviting us on. So not only playing with the physical materials that she's working with, but playing with our sense of place as Canadians as well. And then that brings us to the last pair of pieces on this wall before we take off onto a new section of the gallery space. And these are a pair of photographs by Wendy Orr. One of the things I'd like you to note is that these two buildings and window frames are actually looking at one another. And so if you look at the top photograph and you see your Wendy's shooting her camera out a large rectangular window and looking at a smaller building with a small rectangular window, when you look at the photograph below, you'll realize that the building from the photograph above is the building that is captured through the window frame in the photograph below. And so these two photographs are almost mirror images of one another. These buildings are facing one another. And so this is something that Wendy wanted to explore, going out into the landscape, getting permission from farmers to explore older buildings on the prairies is something the photography club does quite often. And so several of them will go out and photograph together. And so Wendy was quite captured by these two buildings that seem to hold an immense amount of history together. And so we can start as the viewer to create a narrative of this top photograph called The Beginning. Is this the first building that was created on this property when someone moved in and started to farm the land? Is the second building captured in the photograph the reason how things have developed? How are these works and how are these histories being shared and being known? Are the stories of these families available to us? And if not, what kind of stories can we pull from our own experiences to kind of fill in those gaps? So there are these really powerful pieces that sort of help to create a sense of narrative and give a sense of narrative to these buildings. As we move along the gallery space, we come along the east wall of the exhibition. And this is where we start to move away from home as a physical building. And so one of the things I was most entranced by the artists who were wanting to take place in this or take part in this exhibition was how many of them were not thinking about home as a physical building, as a place that they interact with. They're thinking about home as a broader community, a landscape that is familiar and that we belong to. And so a lot of the works in the show are actually not set within homes, they're set within the surrounding landscape and the surrounding community, really looking to nature for inspiration and to give us that sense of place. And so we'll start in the winter time and we'll venture out from the buildings into the seasons and go throughout the year. And so we start with these winter landscapes. And this one here is quite familiar to anyone who's grown up in St. Albert, is the Sturgeon River Valley. And so you get that sense of wandering. Crystal's drawing with that strong sense of perspective and the vanishing point of the river sort of fading into the background invites you as the viewer to feel welcome to walk down this pathway, to follow the river where it might lead. We can imagine that it is a familiar place to us. Anyone who's lived in this neighborhood or in this area is familiar with these walkways. And so these scenes are very inviting and very welcoming. But I think one of the strengths of Crystal's work is that this scene isn't specific enough to the Sturgeon River Valley to not be relatable to anyone else. And so what I mean by that is that this scene with the trees that have been a little bit blurred, with the landscape that doesn't have any monument specific to St. Albert, it makes this scene relatable to anyone who might have walked across a snowy landscape or along a snowy river. And that makes it quite welcoming to everyone who comes to see the exhibition. As we move along, we're sort of greeted by these wonderful winter scenes with these two geese on the top by Don Kawahara, which is a photograph that's actually been printed on canvas. And one of the things that I've noticed about this exhibition is viewers are very taken with this photograph, Homeward Bound by Don Kawahara. At the outset, it seems very simple. It's two geese in a vast gray sky. But there's something luscious about the sky itself, which is an odd thing to say about shades of gray. But there's enough variation in the gray clouds behind the geese that you don't get a sense of flatness from the clouds. It's something that seems to go on forever. As well as it's very difficult to tell whether these geese are coming in the spring or leaving in the fall. There's no landscapes or landmarks to ground it. And so again, one of those things I've mentioned before is that one of the strengths of the work is it gives you a site for story to bring your own interpretations to the piece. And so I've placed it in this winter section as a way for you as the viewer to decide whether winter is beginning or ending. The bottom two works by Katie Burley Wood are these wonderful photographs that have these really striking compositional elements, and they pair beautifully with the work by Don Kawahara. And so you can see with these two photos, we've got this striking winter snow on the bottom that seems almost untouched. It's almost like a complete band of white, that there's very little variation to it. And compositionally, this helps to encourage your eye to look at the other elements in the screen, sort of forcing your vision upwards to the buildings and to the clouds. The skies in these pieces are quite dynamic. You can imagine in Silos, which is on the right, that it's one of those very crisp, intensely blue skies that we get here on the prairies, generally on a day where it's brutally cold. And those white fluffy clouds kind of journeying across. In the background, just under the roofs of the silos, you get a deeper bank of cloud, possibly imagining a storm on the horizon. Looking to the winter home photograph of this older building, these images seem really timeless. It's almost as if these two pieces are sort of part of the same continuum, part of the same story, but it's hard to place them as belonging in the right now or belonging in the past or possibly belonging in the future. And sort of leaving that open, not including any cars or planes or any markers of exactly when we are, is a strength for these photos because they seem relevant no matter when you're looking at them or no matter what perspective you're looking at them from. I also enjoy the clouds in the left-hand image because it seems that that storm on the horizon in the right is sort of coming upon you, as well as that sort of band of clouds at the top sort of encourages your eye to come back down again to the building, keeping your eye moving throughout the piece, absorbing in all of the details. Next to this work, we come to a mixed media painting by Katherine Blanchett called Deep White or Profondeur Blanche. And this is a work that I really do encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to come see in person. It's quite difficult for all artwork to translate exactly onto a screen, whether it's photography or drawing or painting. It's never quite the same in person it's never quite as luscious or detailed on a screen as it is in person, no matter how high the resolution of the image is. But sometimes you get other types of artwork that lose a lot when they get translated into digital. And this is one of those pieces. There's a lot of texture in this work. So each of these individual brushstrokes that kind of make up this mosaic element in the snow, as well as there's a lot of textures in the sky that are sort of raised up that are quite difficult to see on a screen. There's also that interactive element that you get with artwork of if you change your position or your location, light reflects off the surface in different ways. And so with this piece, there's several metallic elements of these little balls of silver that are placed throughout the piece that, depending on the time of day or your location in the gallery, they really glow and shine. And so it's one of those things I ask everybody quite frequently is to change your position when you're in the gallery space. And this applies to any artwork. Try looking at it from different angles, from across the room, turn around and look at the wall behind you, because the artworks are bound to change a little bit and your perception of them change quite dramatically depending on where you're standing. And so as we're kind of moving through this winter section, we get a couple of images, one from Sylvania, one from Jan F, that remind us of these deep moments of winter, whether it's this stunning photograph of this red bridge from here in St. Albert that's been framed in by hoar frost on this wonderful misty day, that reminds us of those kind of cold days where breathing in is a little bit painful, to these beautifully sculpted snowbanks on the bottom in this windswept roadway by Jan Van Veen that's been captured in the bottom. Both of them striking compositions that really capture our own ideas of winter, which is something that plays into our identity of people who exist in winter landscapes. This brings us to one of the only abstract pieces in the exhibition, which is created by Pearl Durr. It's quite large, it's about 6 feet tall by about 4 feet wide. And a lot of people initially are a little taken aback by this work. They are wondering why it belongs in an exhibition entitled Drawn Home, where the theme is thinking about places, how you create a sense of place. And that is exactly why this piece was created. And so Pearl created this work when she was moving into a new home, and she wanted to create an artwork that would not only make her new home feel like a place that she's belonged for years, but welcome anyone else into this place and make them feel at home as well. And so while it is an abstract work, the theme and the intentions behind the work fit perfectly with the exhibition. And it's sort of a striking reinterpretation of the theme that I think is quite powerful. We come to another trio of pieces, and so you can imagine this is actually placed on top of the two pieces that we'll see next, kind of coming into those late elements of winter. This piece by Magdalena Berry, I wanted to discuss how it was printed. And so while it's a photograph, it's not actually been printed onto paper. She's chosen to print it onto aluminum with a plexiglass cover on top. And so when you see photographs printed like that in person, it gives a sense of depth and vastness to the work that you don't necessarily capture quite as well in flat or printing on paper. And so it gives us as the viewer a lot of impressions of different types of ways of printing photographs and different approaches you can take for different effects. The pieces placed underneath those are Nesting 1 and Nesting 7 by Susan Burwald. And these pieces were created during the early lockdowns of 2020 when we were first self-isolating and staying at home. One of the things Susan noticed is that a lot of people were turning to activities that their grandmothers might have used, whether that's embroidery or knitting, making bread or cookies, preserving, gardening, all became very popular activities. And so Susan thought this was really interesting and sort of played with that idea of nesting, of sort of creating homey spaces by returning to activities of the past. And so she created these beautiful mixed media collages that sort of play with that idea of nesting, including a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, needle and thread, little feathers, sort of blending this idea of home from different places and some of those emotional connections we create to make a place a home. As we kind of move out of the winter section, we come to these beautiful elements of springtime, including this painting by Victoria Armstrong. And so this is a painting that she created when she noticed there was a flock of swans who were migrating north again. But one of those lovely spring snowstorms that we all love blew in and sort of kept the swans on the lake for a little bit of an extra amount of time. And so they weren't able to move on until the snow had melted again. I love Victoria's choice of creating these, putting in these really large snowflakes because it creates this a little bit of a dreamlike atmosphere to the painting. And so it'd be the same as sort of that strange effect that spring snowfalls have of feeling a little bit unreal and feeling a little bit disjointed from what we've become to know. And I feel like that effect is captured really well in Victoria's work. As the snow begins to melt, which is captured beautifully in the sunset photograph by Francois Noel, the birds and the life return to the environment, and we're able to sort of see regrowth and renewal in the world around us. And we come to these wonderful photographs by Don Hornsberg. We have the prairie crocuses, some of the first flowers of spring, which are paired with the painting by Tracy Lynn Prop on the bottom of the snow retreating away from the trestle bridge here in St. Albert and sort of life returning after a long winter. With life returning comes to the springtime renewal and the reemergence of small creatures. And whilst I'm aware that there generally aren't raccoons in the area, I couldn't help but include this wonderful, adorable piece by Sandy Dewar titled Hide and Seek, of these three little raccoons stacked together into a tree trunk. Sandy's work is really impressive because of her treatment of fur and feathers, if you see any of her bird paintings. She mentioned that that's one of her favorite things to paint, is actually these really tiny, delicate details in fur. While it's quite challenging, when it works out well, it is just magical. And I feel like it was accomplished quite strongly in this work. As we move around and away from that eastern wall, we come across our northern wall of windows. And I wanted to include these two sculptures by Susan Shear because they're quite whimsical. And to me, they remind me of something that you would see in a children's story. And again, coming back to that idea of memory and that idea of childhood playing into our notions of what makes a house a home. And so I felt like these little works, whilst very different from anything else in the exhibit, were a perfect fit for the theme. You'll notice in the exhibition space, there's a large installation of 12 hanging paintings. And so these are painted onto semi-transparent shears. And so they're actually window curtains that the artist bought and then painted onto using acrylics and charcoal. And it's called Walk in the Woods by Doris Cheray. And so this work is about creating sort of that illusion of the forest environment and wanting to create a series of paintings that you as the viewer can physically enter and wander through. It's a grove of aspen trees in the fall, and you get a sense of that luscious color. And each individual painting is absolutely stunning, but together they create this really immersive space that you as the viewer walk through physically before you come to the last section of the exhibition. Then one of the other lovely things about these pieces is because they are free hanging, they tend to respond to your presence as the viewer. And so the panels will shift and move as the air currents in the gallery shift and change, giving you new opportunities to see details or new interpretations that you might not have noticed before. This brings us to the last section in the exhibition, which kind of returns us to summer and works its way through fall. As you'll notice, there are still a lot of ideas of wandering and different pathways. We see another two pieces by Katherine Mcmillan, again playing with that sense of searching for home and searching for home within, so looking to those emotional connections and those memories as a site for home. Whereas the piece on top by Lorena Bynes is a shoreline. And I thought this was a really important piece to include in the exhibition because one does not always necessarily feel most at home where one lives all the time. Sometimes we feel most at home whilst we're away on vacation or by large body of water. Everyone has these emotional connections to places we might not get to experience every day. And so I thought it was important to include this beautiful painting of an oceanscape by Lorena Bynes because it plays into that idea of feeling comfort and welcoming and peace in a place that might be other from where you live in your day to day. We come to these beautiful watercolor paintings by Rhema Peterson. And Rhema is really interested in painting the landscape around us and sort of the natural environment as it exists. So looking to the species that are naturally occurring in any different environment, whether that be sort of mountain species like limber pine and the spotted coral root as you'd capture on the bottom, or tiny vignettes of flowers that you would see all existing together, like the piece on the top with flowers on Anadak Ridge. And so Rhema is really interested in capturing the natural world, both beautifully through her watercolor painting, but also capturing sort of the scientific core of these pieces. And so capturing the plants as they truly exist and trying not to alter her interpretations too much so that you can understand these works, understand these flowers kind of intimately as well as artistically. We have another piece by Tracy Lynn Prop, which I feel is a comforting scene of summer and something that's familiar to all of us. You get the sense that this piece is created either very early in the morning or very late in the evening. I tend to identify it as an evening piece, but that's because I'm not a morning person. But it's open to interpretation. For me, this piece very much reads as a summer sunset. This would be very late in the evening at the height of summer when I look at it. And part of that is because the trees are fully leafed out, they're green, the grass is green. So it's probably not the end of August just yet because things don't look quite dry enough. And so for me, I imagine seeing this scene as coming home from possibly a long day of hiking, a long day of experiencing or exploring outdoors, or possibly visiting with family and friends and on your journey home. And so to me, this image is quite comforting because it is associated in my mind with happy events and time spent with family and friends. And it's a roadway that's familiar. Leclerc Way is just sort of on the northwest side of St. Albert. And so it's a site that we might all know, but Tracy Lynn's presenting it in a way that's really beautiful. Sort of these wonderful, lush, loose brush strokes that gives you the impression of the place whilst not giving you every single detail. It's kind of dreamy and sort of like a memory of this wonderful place. We come to another couple of images from artists that we have seen before. So Peg Mcpherson, you might remember from early on in the tour for her other pieces combining birds and flowers. Again, investigating that idea of careful looking, this time at the height of summer. As well as this photograph by Dawn Hornsberger, to sunset at Lacombe Lake Park. We start to fade into fall and sort of enjoy those last little dregs of summer. And we come to another photograph by Dawn Kawahara. And I really like this image because she's including the people that make house a home for her. And so this is a photograph of her son in a place that she feels he is most at home. So out in the woods, exploring in nature. And so those emotional connections to the people that we have is something that we can't forget when we're thinking about place and what gives us meaning in this world. And so I think it's a really interesting piece to include and has a wonderful place in the exhibition. This work here by Melanie Hassau is a piece that blends botanical florals with acrylic painting. And so you can see that there's actual little bits of plant material that have been included into the work. So whether that's a little bit of creeping thyme, these daisy heads, lavender, blueberry leaves, and these ferns. But what Melanie does is she'll often paint the plant material so that it blends into the composition really beautifully. And it makes it, as the viewer, a little bit difficult to tell immediately just how much plant material is on the piece. It's hard to tell in photographs. It's something you kind of need to see in person, but they blend in wonderfully. And so each of these little ferns have been painted to match into the acrylic painting that Melanie put down as sort of her base sketch and the base environment to populate with these plant images. We start moving out of summer and into fall with these two beautiful photographs by Barry Rusick. And so both of these kind of give impressions of places that are home then and now. And so these wonderful sort of dilapidated barns that were that's still on a property. You can see that the dirt has been upturned. This is still a site that people wander through, but it's obviously not being used or lived in the same way that it once was. So like those photographs we saw from Wendy Orr at the beginning of the tour, we can imagine the people and the history and the places and memories that have been created here. Whereas on the photograph on top, we kind of come to another one of those pathways and roadways that are so common in this exhibition. In this case, leading us home to a modern homestead out in the woods. And so that brings us to a really interesting piece by Bruce Thompson. And one of the things I wanted to touch on with this work is that what mediums are being used, because when you first look at it, it's quite difficult to tell. And so how Bruce creates his artworks is he'll create a very loose oil painting of a landscape using very bright colors, lots of rich tones, and lots of rich paint and thick layers of paint on the canvas. He'll then take highly detailed photographs, working with a company in Edmonton and a gentleman named Clement to sort of take these highly detailed, high resolution images of his paintings, which he then imports into Photoshop and starts to edit and manipulate digitally. And so he says what he enjoys most about this process is that no digital changes exist in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is that making slight changes or using digital tools in one area will have a cascade effect to the area around it. And so this process is very much about experimentation and play, using these different tools and sort of algorithms within the Photoshop program to edit and adjust the painting in a way that he wouldn't have been able to do with just paint on its own. Once he's happy with the composition and the changes that have happened, he then reprints the final piece back onto canvas, sort of completing this loop of returning the piece back to the structure that it was initially created on. And so when you look at this work on canvas, you can see some of the details and brushstrokes because the photographs themselves are such high resolution, but you start to get the impression that it's not just a painting. And so there's a lot of detail and intrigue that happens in this work as well. As we come to the end of the exhibition, I thought it was fitting to kind of bring us back to those human presences, those emotional presences that sort of make house a home. There's this wonderful, touching photograph by Italo Pino called Empathy on the top, and it's paired with the chilling together photo on the bottom, sort of capturing these common family events and family interactions. So whether that's long summer days, just being outside, letting the time stretch on in sort of this hazy summer way, or whether those emotionally charged events and moments in life, be they happy or sad, joyous or tragic, it's hard to tell with empathy. But we have this photo of these two women who are sort of embracing, who are very close together. And it's been left open enough for us by the photographer to bring our own interpretations to it. Depending on the day, some days I see this as very happy and joyous news that's been announced, and other days it might be sad, difficult news, and that's why these women are embracing. And so to end the exhibition, I thought it was only fitting to leave us on a pathway forward, leave us with this waterway that carries the journey forward out into the landscape again. And that's by Rainy Creek by Connie Clark here. And so thank you all very much for joining us for today's virtual tour of Drawn Home. I know that was a bit of a whirlwind, and so you're welcome to rewind and take a watch through again. And if you have the opportunity, the show is available to view in person until September 18th, which is a Saturday, and you're welcome to stop by the gallery anytime from Tuesday to Friday from 1 until 5 p.m. or Saturdays from 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. I hope to see you again soon, and thank you so much for joining us for today's tour.